Hello and welcome to another Spectator TV US election special. Now you can get 10% off a subscription to our monthly American print edition if you go to spectator.us/subscribe. You just enter the promo code TV to get that 10% discount, and we'll throw in a free whiskey tumbler. You're only getting that because you are a Spectator TV viewer. So, only 2 weekends to go before America votes on the 3rd of November, though millions of Americans are already voting and have voted. We had the second and final debate last night between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It actually was a debate, something we didn't have a first time round. Whether it's changed any minds is what we're here to discuss today, and to look at some of the points that came up, the issues that were discussed, the performance of the candidates, and then the final 10 days or so of this campaign of 2020. I'm joined by Christopher Meyer, the former ambassador to the United States for the United Kingdom. We've got Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor of the National Interest magazine, and the Spectator's Washington editor, Amber Athey, our US editor, Freddie Gray. That's our lineup. Let's get going. Christopher, let me come to you first. What was your overall impression of last night's debate? Clearly a big improvement on the first debate.
Well, it was a big improvement on the first debate, but that's to set an extremely low bar. That is to say, the two candidates were able to discuss policy matters and disagree without the thing descending into sort of descending Trump screaming match. But that's not saying very much. Was it an election swayer in any significant way? I very much doubt it. There were things I liked from both sides, but I don't think that this would make a huge impression on the electorate. I liked Trump's discipline compared with his wild man act of the first debate, and I thought that Biden, whose mental powers are sometimes questioned, had a very good zinger when Trump said you're going to have to live with the virus, and he came straight back and said, well, American people are going to have to die with the virus. I thought all that was quite good, and it was all quite interesting, but this surely was not an election decider.
Jacob, what's your overall impression of what happened?
I regret to report that I agree with Ambassador Meyer, almost 100%. I thought Trump was good, Biden was better. Both improved from the previous debate. And in a sense, what came home to me was that having Trump as a foil is probably the only person that could get Joe Biden elected as the Democratic president. Because Biden himself, to be blunt, when I say was better than Trump, that is a low bar. His performance was palpably weak on a number of fronts, including on North Korea, on race, where he was unable to really cogently counter by Trump on the super predator line, and finally on fracking. It really did sound like Joe Biden, to the average American's ear, wants to wipe out the oil industry almost overnight.
No, that was a remarkable point in the debate. Either honest or foolhardy, one or the other. Amber, Trump was good, but Biden was better. What do you say to that?
I think the two fellows before me are being far too modest about President Trump's performance last night. When you look across all of the debates that he's participated in, this was by far his strongest. And as I wrote for the Spectator's US edition last night, I actually think he was aided by the new debate rules that were implemented by the Commission on Presidential Debates. I suspect that the CPD probably thought that they were going to hurt Trump by not allowing him to do his signature interruptions and quick comebacks. But actually, it turns out all the president really needed was just a little bit of discipline. And he was able to counter Biden's points effectively. And I think one of the most underrated moments from the debate was, in fact, the portion on the coronavirus. And while Mr. Meyer identified Biden's comeback about it being something Americans have to learn to die with, I thought that was actually a very bad moment for Joe Biden because it presented two different visions for the country. One from the president, which was deeply optimistic, and one from the former vice president that was very negative and dark and talked about Americans having to wake up tomorrow missing a member of their family. For many people across the country who are looking for a sense of normalcy and trying to get back into their daily routines, that is not a message that's going to play well for them.
Christopher?
Well, that may be right, actually. Amber may have hit the nail on the head, except that wasn't the way I felt. But maybe it's because I don't have an American sensibility and I'm not living in America and I'm not having the American fear of coronavirus. And I know that optimism always trumps, if I can use that expression, pessimism. All that said, the fact that Biden could make a comeback like that, and you might have been worried about his mental powers, actually seems to have been a sufficient answer to that level of doubt.
Freddie, I was quite surprised. In terms of being a debater, Mr. Trump was on his game last night. He debated better than I had seen him debate in 2016, never mind the first debate. What did you think?
I thought he was good. And like Amber, I think that the microphone rules helped him. I thought he needled Biden quite effectively because he was more polite. And the fact that he got that remarkable statement about we're going to transition away from oil, which really will, if it gets enough pickup, hurt him in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, where there's a hell of a lot of oil and fracking jobs. I thought it was a clever bit of skewering from Trump, and it seems as though the coronavirus has actually turned him into a more intelligent person.
Jacob, how significant was that statement by Mr. Biden that essentially, over time, he didn't specify how long, but he was going to see the end of the oil industry in America. And Mr. Trump immediately jumped on it saying, hey, Texas, did you hear that? Hey, Oklahoma, did you hear that? Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, did you hear that? Well, was that a brave thing for Mr. Biden to say, or hadn't he thought it through?
I think he just said what he believes. And he was talking about a transition, but it wasn't clear from the way he enunciated his stand that he was talking over the long term. It came across as much more rapid, and Trump pounced on it. If 47 million people had not already voted as of yesterday, if Trump was not down to $63 million in his campaign finances, and if Trump had another 4 to 5 weeks and was by some miracle able to adhere to a consistent political message, something that he has woefully failed to do, I think last night showed that he could, in fact, not only have given Biden a run for his money, but likely defeated him. I don't think it's going to happen now that we're 11 days away from the election.
Amber, what do you say to that?
I think that's a fair point. For many, this seems like too little too late. And the Trump campaign is probably really missing the fact that what was supposed to be the second debate was moved to virtual and then eventually canceled. If they had had two debates like this a little bit further out from the election, you'd certainly see more of a move in the polls than one that is coming really far too late in the campaign to really provide a significant boost for the president.
Let's look at this fracking issue, Freddie, because it's a big issue in the United States. It's created lots of very well-paid jobs. It's helped to make America, both on the oil and gas side, pretty much energy independent now. And the key thing is that it happened despite the Obama administration, not because of the Obama administration. Mr. Obama himself was never that keen on fracking, but American industry went ahead. I'm not really quite clear what Joe Biden's position is now. He seems to say at times that he is going to wind up fracking. Then he says no fracking on federal lands. And he says, no, I'm not going to wind up fracking. He seems to be all over the place on it, in fact. Freddie?
He's flipped and flopped hopelessly on fracking and energy policy. I think the statement on transition was what's known as a Washington gaffe, where you accidentally tell the truth. I think that obviously there are a lot of Democratic votes in being green, in the Green New Deal. It excites young people, and it looks as though the Democrats are going to get quite a big turnout of young people for them in 10 days' time. But as I say, that making that statement was a slip, and it will hurt him in crucial swing states.
It is interesting, Christopher, that the debate goes on, and yet, as Jacob says, millions and millions of Americans have already voted. It's a very different campaign from what we've been used to.
Well, it's certainly a very different campaign from the two campaigns that I observed when I was working in the United States. The first was Clinton and Bush Sr., and the second Al Gore and Bush Jr. where there were some voting in advance and nothing like on the scale that we're seeing now, which is itself far more than I believe than in 2016. And as far as I can see, the pundits are not entirely clear who this favours, although it looks to be favouring the Democrats. And the question I ask myself, and this is not a novel insight by any means at all, is that if Trump loses, and he loses quite narrowly, he may scream foul. He may say there's been corruption, there's been foul play. And the fact that so many millions of votes have been cast in advance postally may give him ammunition to drag this thing through the courts. And if he does decide to do this, we may start to see something which makes the hanging chads in Florida of November and December 2000 look like child's play. And I think that is, I don't know how worried Americans are by this, but looking from this side of the Atlantic, it seems to me a very strong possibility, particularly if he's managed to get Amy Barrett into the Supreme Court in time.
No, it's a scary prospect. Jacob, you think, am I right in saying that the early voting is to Mr. Biden and the Democrats' advantage?
It's clear that the news reports are showing that there are a number of new first-time voters and that the Democrats are stockpiling a vast quantity of votes. So Trump goes into November 3rd quite significantly behind in the voting toll. He's counting on a massive Republican turnout. Now, I think it's a risky strategy, because what if the weather is bad in certain states? What if his campaign continues to implode in the next 2 weeks and he just simply doesn't get the turnout? My own gut, and I could be obviously woefully wrong here, is that Donald Trump is going to achieve the impossible. He is going to create the conditions for a landslide victory for Joe Biden, something that hasn't happened for any Democrat or Republican in decades. I do not believe that this election will be close.
Oh, so you think not only that the Democrats win, but it's going to be a landslide. And Jacob, if it's a landslide, that means the Democrats take the Senate as well.
Absolutely. I have been relentlessly mocked by Freddie for the past 2 years for making this prediction.
He is a bit of a mocker, Jacob. He is a mocker, I have to tell you.
I think, Jacob, you could well be right. You often are.
He's not mocking you now, Jacob.
But I'll have to eat humble pie or something in a few days' time.
But are you beginning to think that Mr. Biden might win?
Yes, I think it's likely. I think what the Democrats are worried about, which is quite interesting, is that they might have cannibalized their turnout with all the mail-in voting. And so you are getting this strange sort of flipping between two different messages from a lot of senior Democrats who sort of talk a lot about mail-in voting and the importance of it, and then they suddenly start sort of tweeting out or making statements saying, absolutely do it on the day, you've got to turn out on the day. They're worried that they're going to eat up their own vote in a lot of states.
Amber, does the Hunter Biden story and the stuff associated around it, has that had any traction, or has the major liberal media, the networks and the big newspapers, have they managed to really close it down by largely ignoring it?
It's had relatively little impact, and of course that's partially due to the fact that the story has largely been censored on social media. The New York Post is still not allowed to post on their Twitter account because of the fact that they shared the story on their account. And then there's the fact that you have various mainstream media outlets calling this the product of Russian disinformation with no evidence. You have PBS releasing a statement calling the story a distraction. And the problem is that the parts of the story that would perhaps change voters' minds are a little bit deeper beyond what might be floating around on social media or even covered very minimally by mainstream media outlets. You kind of have to dig in to realize that the problem is Joe Biden lied at the very least about being involved in his son Hunter's business dealings. That type of corruption is very off-putting for voters, but they have to do a lot of legwork to get to that particular point.
Christopher, what do you make of it? I must say, I don't think the Biden story is a game changer, not at least not what I've seen, but it is an interesting story. There are questions about it that should be asked. But I see, as a journalist, I see no reason why the New York Times or the Washington Post or the American networks shouldn't be covering this story. But by and large, they haven't. They've really acted together to shut it down. What do you say to that?
I've got to say, Andrew, my instinct when I first read about the Hunter Biden story was this is no big deal. And this is certainly not something that is going to move tens of thousands of Americans not to vote for Joe Biden and to cross over to the other side. It might make some people decide to abstain because there's a plague on both their houses, but I just don't see it as a game changer at all.
But is that a reason for not covering it? That's my question. I don't see it as a game changer either.
I don't know. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a journalist. If you think that, then I will follow your wisdom on this. It doesn't.
To hear it.
It could be an interesting story, but I mean, you've got to, as Amber said, you've got to dig down. I mean, what actually was going on there?
I mean, I guess, Jacob, you could say the same thing about the New York Times and Donald Trump's tax returns, because what did they show? They showed that he hardly made enough profit to be taxed, and he was up to his neck in debt. Who knew that? We all knew that.
In my view, the Hunter Biden story was sheer piffle.
You don't think it was Russian piffle, do you?
It's possible, but I don't even really care. Let's say that even if Joe Biden had done these things, which I don't think he did, it still would be of nugatory interest for most of the public. All of these stories about Ukraine and Russia have turned out to be a damp squib. They didn't hurt Donald Trump, and they're not going to hurt Joe Biden. Hunter Biden is not running for the presidency, and there's just it's a nothing burger.
So you think it was right for the big media, if I can call them that, not to follow up the New York Post story?
Absolutely. You don't get to manufacture the news. The equivalent would be if Rod Blagojevich and Al Sharpton had said that they discovered some secret server that they were unwilling to turn over to any news organization that showed that Ivanka Trump had been engaging in secret dealings in China that we didn't know about. Is every newspaper and television station supposed to go on their hearsay and investigate whatever they want investigated?
I tell you, Freddie, I bet they would have if it had been Ivanka Trump.
If Donald Trump Jr., let's imagine, I hate to do whataboutery, but we've got to do a little bit of it. If Donald Trump Jr. had any business dealings, sort of 10% as shady as Hunter Biden's business dealings were, and any connection towards Donald Trump at all, it would be wall to wall on big media, as we're calling it, for, indefinite. Until Trump is gone, it would be the only story in town.
Amber?
Well, and let's remember too that there has been some independent verification of the fact that these emails are real. Multiple former business partners of Hunter Biden have come out saying that the emails are real. They were either CC'd on them or saw them or were involved in some way. We had a former business partner who was a lieutenant in the military giving a statement to the press last night that he was cooperating with the FBI, that he was CC'd on these emails, and that he knows that for a fact that it's a lie that Joe Biden says that he wasn't involved in Hunter Biden's business dealings. The Biden campaign itself has not questioned the authenticity of these emails. So the idea that this is just some fake server that Rudy Giuliani pulled out of his back pocket is absurd.
I think what Jacob was saying, not necessarily the emails are not real. I mean, the Biden camp has not denied that the emails are real. They've not challenged the emails themselves. I guess what Jacob was saying is they're just not worth a row of beans, Amber.
But even so, he questioned the sourcing, and that's classic opposition research. Of course, the sourcing is always bizarre on these types of late October news dumps. I don't think it's fair to suggest that just because it came from Bannon and Giuliani that the press should automatically dismiss the story.
Jacob?
Well, I guess I view both of them now with increased skepticism given the antics that Giuliani was recently engaged in, and Bannon himself with his own legal difficulties. I'm pretty circumspect. Look, this was the most broadcast October surprise. There was nothing surprising about the surprise. That's why it failed.
Andrew,
Yes, Christopher.
can I just wind the thing back a little bit and get off Hunter Biden? All this,
Indeed, which is precisely what I was about to do. You must have read my mind.
Well, thank you. What I was going to say was, if there was an October surprise, and like a real October surprise, was Trump getting COVID and then Trump recovering from COVID. I'm sorry, I was looking in the wrong direction. Trump recovering from COVID. Now, it seemed to me that when Trump got his COVID, I thought to myself, if he recovers, he's going to be able to go down to a big stadium in somewhere like Florida or Texas, filled with people, and say, I met the devil in the shape of coronavirus and I won, make America great again. And it would be an absolutely winning point. But this seems to have dribbled away into the sand, and people have kind of normalized it into themselves that Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, should get COVID-19 and he should recover from it and he should go back on the campaign. Well, this is stunning stuff, but it's not being treated as such. Or is it? I don't know.
Well, why is more not being made of that? He could have been the Lazarus of the 2020 campaign.
Well, I hate to go back to media bias, but once Donald Trump recovered, it seemed like everyone kind of forgot about the story. While it was happening, there was all of these reports about how Trump was going to die, what was going to happen if Mike Pence had to take over. There was much ado made about the fact that Trump had that ride in the Secret Service car to wave to people outside of the hospital. And then as soon as Trump got better, after he climbed up the steps of the South Portico at the White House, everyone just forgot that he ever even had the virus. And now they mock him again for talking about the fact that the survival rate is over 99%, and seemingly have just memory hold the fact that someone who's in one of the highest risk categories as an overweight, over 70-year-old man seemingly treated this like it was the common cold.
But that's the media, Amber. Do you think there's been any cut through among the American people who are really impressed by a president who has overcome this, as they think, deadly disease?
The problem for Trump is that it would only be among people who were already skeptical about the lockdowns and the extent of the virus. When you have people who are terrified of leaving their homes, the idea that Donald Trump recovered from this is not likely going to be something that's going to change their mind. They're more into the fear mongering and listening to people like Governor Cuomo, who have repeatedly over the past couple of weeks talked about the president's handling of this and touted their own, even though their own handling was a disaster.
Freddie, in the debate last night, there was actually discussion in policy areas. There was discussion about the economy, about fracking, fossil fuels, climate change, and so on, and a bit about law and order as well, and criminal policy. But we live in an age of identity politics now. How big has that been in this campaign? How big has the culture wars in America played out in the 2020 presidential campaign?
I'd say surprisingly muted, actually, partly because you've got two old white guys running. And so it doesn't feel like an identity politics campaign. And the Democrats have got, certainly the Biden campaign, perhaps not the Democrats, have been a lot smarter than Hillary Clinton was about overplaying identity politics. And even with Kamala Harris on the ticket, who's very keen on doing all that stuff, I think they have backed away from woke quite intelligently. And I think that might be one of the reasons they're winning so handsomely in the polls.
And it would be fair to say, I mean, Mr. Trump was going to run on the economy. He keeps on talking about how brilliant the economy was at the beginning of the year or the end of last year. And COVID, Freddie, has been a double whammy for him in this campaign. Obviously, the economy's taken a huge hit because of COVID. And at the same time, his handling of COVID has been widely criticized. And if we look back, and if he isn't going to do well, would it be that double combination which really done him in the end?
Well, yeah, very early on, Ross Clark wrote an excellent piece on the Spectator's US website calling the pandemic the black swan event that could derail a Trump presidency. And I think if Trump loses, that will be how we will have to see it. I mean, things were looking pretty rosy for him going into the year. Impeachment worked greatly in his favour because he ended up looking much stronger from it, and the Democrats looked very silly. And then COVID comes along and absolutely destroys his presidency in very grave ways.
Amber, what's the mood in the Trump campaign at the moment? Is it a bit despairing, buoyed up by last night, perhaps? Maybe thinking that they can still pull it off, or it's just too high a mountain to climb?
It does seem like there's more optimism over the past week than there was the last time that we spoke, where I think a lot of people were starting to think about polishing up their resumes, especially people who worked in the administration. But there has been reason for people to feel a bit better about the president's chances, the debate last night just being one of them. One thing that's constantly pointed out to me is in the Real Clear Politics average across battleground states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, et cetera, Hillary Clinton's polled lead in 2016 was about 5 to 6 percentage points in each of those states. Joe Biden's is actually around 3 to 4 percentage points. So if the polls are off as badly as they were in 2016, then that's reason for the Trump campaign to feel very comfortable about where they're sitting, because ultimately those states are the ones that will decide the election, and the national polls don't mean a whole lot.
What do you say to that, Jacob? Because that Real Clear Politics average of the battleground states, for Mr. Biden, I think in all but one of the states, his lead is well within the margin of error.
I'm not saying that it's obviously possible that Trump wins. He has a 10 to 13% chance right now, and that everything broke for him in 2016. But there's one difference, and that difference actually occurred today, 4 years ago. James Comey, the FBI director, released his announcement stating that he was looking into Clinton's emails. And Trump has been desperate for that kind of October surprise. He's not getting it. So I don't think that it's very likely that Trump wins. He obviously has a possibility, but Biden has done everything right. And all he needed last night was a draw in the debate. A draw was a victory for him. And I think he got it. So I am unshakable. I am supremely confident that Biden is going to win this election and that he has in fact run a masterful campaign.
Christopher, how do you read the polls? I mean, the shadow of 2016 hangs over them. If 2016 hadn't happened, everybody would be saying what Jacob's saying, wouldn't they? Everybody's saying Biden's cruising to a victory. But because so many of us had got it wrong last time, we're reluctant to say that now.
Yeah, but we're always governed, dominated by the last election campaign. And the insights that we gain from either polls not being accurate or being accurate are then translated lock, stock and barrel 4 years ahead to the next election campaign, where things may turn out quite differently. This time round it may turn out that the polls have been magnificently accurate, both at the national level and at the state level. And so we will draw a number of general conclusions which we'll seek to apply in 2024, and they will turn out to be completely wrong. So we've got to be unbelievably careful about polls whose techniques are constantly adjusted. The thing that stays in my mind is a brief conversation I once had with President George W. Bush about the Florida recounts and the hanging chads and all that. And he said to me, well, the reason that happened, it was our fault on the Bush side, on the Bush campaign side, because we took our foot off the pedal in Florida over the last weekend. And since I always considered President George W. Bush to be a great master of retail politics and campaigning and so on and so forth, it does underline how narrow the margins really are. If results can depend on something so tiny as taking your foot off the pedal over the last weekend. So I haven't a clue which way it's going to break. I've always thought that Trump was going to win, and I'm starting to have my doubts, mainly because of the money, because Biden's got so much money and Trump seems to be in considerable difficulty, if that is true, or is it a rumor? I don't know, but he seems to have very little cash. And the money nearly always flows to the candidate who the money people think is going to win. And I think that's always a pretty accurate predictor.
Freddie, traditionally in American elections, the Republicans always had more money than the Democrats. They were the party of Wall Street and the country clubs and so on. It's clear in this campaign, Mr. Biden's been able to raise a lot more than Mr. Trump, including from Wall Street. That's a change in American politics.
It is a change, and it's an interesting one because, again, at the beginning of the year, all we were hearing from slightly smug Republican sources was that they had this Death Star machine, that they built up a huge data juggernaut, and that they had sort of billions to throw at it. And it seems like Brad Pascali, the campaign manager, now slightly disgraced campaign manager, was talking a lot of rot and was exaggerating his data skills and what they could do. Because suddenly the Trump campaign, I get sign-ups from the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign, and their campaign emails just started sounding more and more desperate and begging for donations. And I think it helps them in a way because they like portraying Team Trump as the sort of the underdog against the Wall Street giant. But they are desperate for money and they need it.
Amber, if the polls starting to tighten, not so much the national poll, but the battleground state polls, if they begin to tighten, it will seem in the final days like a real race still.
Yes, that's exactly right. And people are going to be looking for that heading into Election Day. It seems like it's already starting to happen a bit. And during Trump's debate performance last night, we actually saw in the betting markets, North Carolina flipped in the middle of the debate. Before it was predicted to go blue, and then about halfway through, all of a sudden, North Carolina was red. So if that's any indication that the debate performance will pay off at least a little bit for the president, at the very least, he can count on North Carolina to come through.
So what happened in North Carolina? Because that is one of the key swing states, traditionally a Republican state, but the demographics are changing massively around Charlotte and Raleigh, becoming more Democrat. So explain what's happened.
On the betting markets, North Carolina was essentially predicted to go towards Joe Biden based on how many people were placing money on him. In the middle of the debate, it actually turned red, meaning more people were betting on Donald Trump to win.
Jacob?
Look, North Carolina is on a very thin wedge. It's the Rasmussen report yesterday had Trump at 48% and Biden 47%. Presumably it will stay a red state, but I think Trump firmed up his Republican support yesterday. Look, he stopped the bloodletting. It was a more measured performance. Whether it's enough to win this election, I doubt it. And North Carolina is not going to be decisive in this election.
Freddie, let's look to the final 10 days or so of the campaign. Now, Mr. Obama's been campaigning against Mr. Trump too. Mr. Trump, I guess Joe Biden needs to keep his head down if he's the front runner, and he gets through it. Donald Trump has to change the weather. He's the one that now has to make the running if he's to pull it back in the final 10 days.
Well, Trump is a tremendous finisher. That's what he seems to do very well in these campaigns. He got unbelievable amounts of energy, and he does do a lot of these rallies, and he's good at it. Biden, as you say, it's a submarine campaign for him. As long as he can just stay out the way and not do anything disastrous, he's on course to win. And you'll see more of Obama. I thought it was interesting that Obama's actually kept a relatively low profile so far. And then there was this big speech this week in which it was a sort of reminder of what a good speaker Obama is. I don't think he was a particularly brilliant president, but he is an utterly brilliant speaker. And he really identified the key reason why people will vote to get Trump out, and that's exhaustion. You know, he had that line about, aren't you looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner where you don't have to have a row with your family and that sort of thing. And I think that polls suggest that's what Americans really want at the moment, is just to get rid of this turbulent, exhausting king that seems to be ruling over them for so long.
But Christopher, it must be a little bit worrying that the man currently favourite, the one that Jacob is certain is going to be the next president of the United States, he looked pretty tired last night. He almost exhausted. I mean, he did stumble quite a bit. There were no massive gaffes. He didn't repeat that he was running for the Senate rather than the White House, which he has done a couple of times. There were times, though, when he found it difficult to finish a sentence or to be coherent. That's got to be of a concern that this guy is the one likely now to be in the Oval Office.
Yeah, but fortunately for Biden, if he wins, he's not going to have to be in campaign mode for the 4 years of his first presidential term, if it is his first presidential
Because
term.
you mean he won't be running again?
No, well, I don't mean that. He might be running again, but what I'm saying is I think campaigning for as long as American candidates have to campaign is absolutely physically and mentally debilitating. I'm astonished that Joe Biden is able to stay on his feet. And actually, I'm quite surprised that Donald Trump is able as well. But once the campaign is over, if Joe Biden is the winner, although there's lots of work to do during the transition before inauguration and all that, he will be able to take his foot off the pedal and relax a bit. And I would imagine that after his inauguration, he'll be able to settle into a form of being president, of being presidential, that will fit exactly his age and his energies. And he will, if he is lucky and if he is clever, he will choose a set of advisors around him and a role for the vice president that will exactly fit what he is able to do and what he can't do. What you're seeing now is two old men being pressed to the outer limit of their physical and mental energies. And it's not a natural condition. It's a more natural condition once you're sitting in that comfortable chair in the Oval Office and you've got all these guys, National Security Advisor, Chief of Staff, blah, 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 Secretary of State, and you just tell them what to do. But you don't have to get up and make a speech every night in a different part of the United States.
No, it's grueling enough covering these election campaigns in America as a journalist. Never mind actually fighting them. And you travel non-stop. Your day usually starts about 6 in the morning or before in some miserable motel somewhere. And you don't finish until after midnight when you're one of the boys or girls on the bus, as they used to be called. Amber, what do you think the Trump campaign will try to do in the final 10 days?
The biggest thing that they're going to do right now is try to rally up the base. They have Trump heading to Florida today. He's going to have 2 rallies tonight. And what is really going to be the game changer, which is something that Jacob mentioned earlier, is what is in-person turnout going to look like? And we simply can't underestimate how excited the base still is to vote for Donald Trump. On The Spectator, we've been running this series about the secret suburban Trump moms, and one of them described wanting to crawl across broken glass to vote for this president. You simply don't see that same level of energy or excitement from Joe Biden voters. So regardless of what happens on election day, you can be sure that they're trying to get that base just as excited as they were in 2016 to go out and wait in line and cast their vote, no matter what the conditions may be.
So it becomes, Freddie, a battle, and we've talked about this before, of differential turnout. I mean, I would suggest that the Republicans need to hope that they get a massive turnout in their base, and that the Biden base is not quite as enthused about their guy. I mean, that's probably the only route left for the Republicans. Maybe that's been the Republican strategy right from the start.
I think that's probably right, but the big mitigating factor is this, and it's a sort of mysterious factor because we don't quite understand the consequences of it, is this huge amount of mail-in voting and how big a win that is for the Democrats, and to what extent does it cannibalise their on-the-day vote. These are big imponderables, and I don't think anyone really has very good answers to them.
Jacob, if you're right that Mr. Biden wins, but wrong that it's a landslide, and otherwise it's quite close, and there's a big disparity between those who vote on the day, they might be more for Mr. Trump, and those who voted by post, they'll be more for Mr. Biden. that danger of a constitutional punch-up starting the day after the election, that would still be there, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It will be interesting. In 1960, Nixon did not concede immediately. And he and Kennedy and Nixon conferred, and ultimately Nixon decided not to go to the mat. Now, Trump, of course, is already casting doubt on the outcome right now. And I think if the longer the vote count went on, say in Pennsylvania, the more that Trump would be able to stir up suspicion about the election. Ultimately, I think he will have to adhere to the results, but given the nature of the court system, maybe the real election campaign for Trump starts on November 4th.
Indeed. Christopher.
I like that. Yeah, well, I mean, I was in Washington for in 2000, and I was actually sat in the Supreme Court when arguments were held for each side, and it was a moment of terrific drama, people sighing and moaning in the courtroom as if they agreed or disagreed with the differing arguments put forward before the justices. But it was all brought to, it was all a bit of an anticlimax where the verdict was rendered. George W. Bush became president and Al Gore conceded rather gracefully. And we've kind of normalized that. But you think of Trump challenging the result, I can't imagine him doing anything gracefully. And he must hope that with 3 appointees of his own on the Supreme Court, with the Conservative majority that he's got there, that if it does become a matter for the Supreme Court again, as it was back in 2000, that he's going to win. So if I was sitting in his camp, I would say to him, if it were disputed, that it was worth going to the mat, because if it ends up in the Supreme Court, you have a very good chance, Mr. President, of staying Mr. President for another 4 years.
Jacob, I think you want to come in there?
No, I don't have any huge revelations beyond that. I just think that I wonder if Trump has already processed that he's more than likely to lose on November 3rd. There is no real incentive for him to raise a lot of money or spend a lot of money on the election campaign itself. Reserve your powder for what comes after November 4th. Even if you lose the election officially, or if you do lose it, you can still try and win it after November 4th through the courts, through the state legislators, and through public pressure from your base and the militias. That would be one strategy that Trump could definitely pursue if it's close. That's why I think Biden is not only likely to win a knockout blow, but he's looking for a knockout blow.
Because that would stop that happening.
I'm going to go out on a... I want to go on a limb and say that I think that Trump will behave graciously in defeat. And I know I'm going to be in a small minority when I say that, but I think he is always unpredictable. And I think he has been capable of showing graciousness. I thought he showed it on the odd occasion last night. So I suspect in the days following, if assuming a Biden win, in the days following, we might be surprised by how gracious Trump is being, and then maybe in a few weeks' time he'll start spouting conspiracy theories on Twitter. But we know the interesting story today that Jared Kushner is already working on building up the Trump TV project, which some people thought was the plan all along in 2016.
It'll never rival SpectatorTV. They ought to realize that. Sorry, Jacob, what were you saying?
I agree with Freddie. I think that the media in this instance has been somewhat reckless and fails to understand that if Trump clearly loses, he's not going to try and fight the result. He probably would behave graciously. He would be more concerned about maintaining his image. He has no incentive to antagonize Biden. The last thing that Trump would want is for Biden to be coming after him and investigating him, which I don't think Biden has any desire to do. My prediction is that all of this contrary to the pundit class, is going to be a totally normal election. There's not going to be much violence, and it will all go smoothly.
Amber, what do you think? Is he going to go quietly or will he put up a fight?
Well, I think Jacob hit the nail on the head when he mentioned the word image. A lot of the media pundits misunderstand Trump's motivations. They think that for him, it's all about winning and losing, but really what it's about is the optics. He's a reality show master, and so he wants to come out of this looking as good as possible, regardless of what the actual electoral outcome is. We know this because look at how he reacted to impeachment. All of these media outlets claim that he was fuming behind the scenes, that he was so angry. Really, he was rather bemused by it all. And when he came out looking even better than he did before, he chalked it up as a win, even though he sits as one of the very few US presidents who have actually been impeached. I expect he'll have the same reaction regarding the election outcome, and we'll try to make sure that his image stays as intact as possible after that day.
Some of our viewers may hear a little noise in the background. We seem to have a demonstration outside the Spectator's offices here. I don't think it's about us, and I'm sure it's about nothing that any of you have said. So we'll bash on anyway. I'm sure it will move on. Christopher, one of the things that I think doesn't help Mr. Trump, and you can see it here too. I mean, here we are heading into November, and Britain has a gloomy prospect of a winter ahead. Seems to have been a second wave of COVID. The cases are rising again. The deaths have been rising. The country's going back into various states of lockdown. Same has been happening in France and parts of Italy and Spain. It's quite hard for an incumbent to win when people are down, when people are depressed about the current state. Even if if the incumbent is not to blame, it makes it much more difficult, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose you're right, and this is why his own personal recovery from the disease, if indeed that has happened, and we can't be 100% sure, I thought would be so important, because at a time when the disease is still running wild through a number of states where the rate of unemployment is seriously high and people losing jobs with every day that passes, to have a contestant who is an incumbent who has survived and overcome the disease should, in my view, be a source of inspiration, not just for the base, for the people who have always cherished Donald Trump, but for others as well who may be undecided. Because it is, from one angle, it is every cloud has a silver lining, or he is the shining light in a sky of dark clouds. But no one really seems to be talking about this, and maybe what I'm saying is complete and utter poppycock. But it is not easy, I would have thought, to have won an election from a base of increasing unemployment and increasing infection, unless people attach. It's almost like attaching magical powers to a leader who rises above the disease that is striking down everybody else. Does that matter politically in this election? I don't know. I thought it would do.
The truth, I guess, is, Freddie, that for any incumbent, it's a difficult election to win in any country. Probably Angela Merkel in Germany is the only one that would have been sure of winning again, and she is, she's not standing again. So what I'm really saying is that if elections are taking place anywhere in this current environment, the odds have got to be stacked against the incumbent.
Well, it's a very odd thing that Joe Biden, we still think of America as sunny and optimistic and so on. But the last two election cycles, if Biden wins, it looks like the winning candidate is the one who paints the darkest vision of America. I mean, Biden was saying last night that there's going to be a dark winter. And I think there's this sort of feeling that there'll be a return to normalcy, as they say, if a sort of Obama-era restoration project happens with Biden. But will there be can there be a return to normalcy in a global pandemic? It's not going to go away just because Donald Trump leaves the White House. And so I worry about the mood of America in the coming months, because they might sort of think we get rid of this turbulent president and we're still left with a chaotic country.
Amber, how worried are the Republicans about losing the Senate?
Very worried. Recent polls don't look good for Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, for example. And they've been trying really hard to put a dent in Cal Cunningham's somewhat meteoric rise with the allegations of these very lurid sexual affairs. But there's real concern that they could lose the Senate. And of course, that would be hugely damaging, especially if they also lost the presidency, because then there's really no roadblock to whatever Biden agenda that he has planned. Now, the big thing that they are happy about is the fact that they're able to get this Supreme Court nomination through before the election. They're planning to vote on that on Monday. It looks like Amy Coney Barrett will be easily confirmed. And so that will be sort of the swan song, I would say, for Republicans, even if they go down in defeat in November.
Final question to you, Jacob, here. If you're right and there is a Biden administration, and part of the appeal of Mr. Biden has been, hey, listen, I represent a return to normality, and people just got fed up with the kind of Barnum and Bailey Act under Mr. Trump. Will there be a return to normality under Mr. Biden?
It could happen quickly. The irony is that Trump's supervision of Operation Warp Speed to come up with a vaccine seems to be moving very effectively. This could be a great triumph that he hands to Biden. We could have a vaccine in a few months. The other thing is, the economy is in fact poised to recover quickly with the introduction of a vaccine. And if Biden wins the Senate and is able to pass a big infrastructure bill, I would predict that we will perhaps not be quite rivaling China's GDP, but the economy will explode. And some of the credit will retroactively have to be given to Donald Trump.
But too late to keep him in the White House.
Exactly.
Well, somebody pointed out to me that we mentioned before, Harding's campaign in 1920 was a return to normality. But of course, after he won on that, there was anything but return to normality. But as America came out of the First World War and a recession and Spanish flu and race riots, what we got was the Roaring Twenties. Now, it ended in the crash in 29, but the 20s were a period of huge growth and exuberance in the United States. It was a jazz age. And so although things look miserable at the moment, whoever wins the White House, maybe the 2020s might have some of the excitement of the 1920s without the crash. Could we say we had the crash in 2008, so we don't need to repeat the crash again in 2029. I just wanted to finish on a high point there so that our viewers weren't too glum about it all. We're going to leave it there. Thank you to all my guests for being with me on Spectator TV. It's all we've got time for. Just to remind you, if you want to hear more from the Spectator journalists you've heard on this program, subscribe to the Spectator's monthly American edition at spectator.us/subscribe. You get a discount simply by entering the words TV or the letters TV. That's the code. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week when we will be on the cusp of Election Day. Bye-bye.